in Cuba. There's one individual who in the last 8 years since I've known her has stood out more than anyone else. And she is the recipient of this evening's Common Sense Courage Award. And her name is Rosa Maria Payá. And before I ask her to come up, I also would like to welcome to the stage Congresswoman Salazar. Don't know where she's coming from. Yes, please. You'll have to come around this side. Yes. And now, if I could invite Rosa Maria to the stage. Just a word about her. Rosa Maria Payá Acevedo is one of the most recognized Cuban democracy and human rights activists. Her work is focused on advocacy for the human rights and the freedoms of the Cuban people and for a peaceful transition of power on the island by a means of a blinding plebiscite or referendum. Payá is the founder of Cuba Decide, a grassroots campaign to foster democracy in Cuba. She's the executive director of the Foundation for Pan-American Democracy, and she's the honorary president of the Latin American Youth Network for Democracy. As many of you may know, her father was assassinated by the Cuban regime in 2012. And what's remarkable is that by that time, her father had developed a correspondence with the great Czech dissident Václav Havel. And what is remarkable is that even at that point, the Czechoslovak government wouldn't dare to assassinate the leader of the democratic opposition there in Czechoslovakia, Václav Havel. And yet the brutal dictatorship in Cuba, brutal today as it has ever been, was willing to assassinate her father and continues this reign of terror today. And I believe one day we will be able to travel freely to a free and independent Cuba, and hopefully it will be led by a democratically elected Rosa Maria Payá. But for tonight, we will merely offer you our Common Sense Courage Award. Please, Rosa Maria Payá.
Thank you so much, Marion. And thank you, Chairman Peter Fee, and of course to Governor DeSantis for his presence and his support here tonight, and his defense of freedom everywhere, as well as Congresswoman and dear friend María Elvira Salazar. And of course, Marion and David, longtime supporters of the cause of freedom also in Cuba. It is an honor to win the Common Sense Courage Award from an organization that carrying out the urgent mission of promoting liberty and its sisters, prosperity and beauty. As Hans-Urs von Balthasar said, in a world without beauty, the good also loses its attractiveness. No wonder communism is grotesque. We Cubans know this to be true. Communism mutilates the human soul in order to control society. But communism is not the only brand authoritarians use to systematically attack societies. Therefore, the battle that we all should be fighting is to stop authoritarian socialism, to end cancel culture, to open the eyes of young people to the lies of the propaganda that they are being fed, and to revoke communist power in the world. Actually, this hemisphere has paid a high price for tolerating dictatorship in Cuba. It has caused the end of democracy in Nicaragua and Venezuela and caused the largest refugee crisis in our region. The Cuban regime threatens peace and security in the continent, but especially in this country, by systematically provoking migratory crisis. It is involved in Russian sonic attacks against American diplomats, initially called the Havana Syndrome, and in many other sorts of criminal-related activities, from trafficking persons to providing sanctuary and support to terrorists. For the last 60 years, the Cuban regime has been portrayed as the innocent victim of the United States, as David versus Goliath. But the real Goliath is the Cuban regime, and the real David is the Cuban people. And that people have revolted. Last July, hundreds of Cubans went into the streets, province by province, and asked for libertad, liberty. The regime reacted by militarizing the country. They imprisoned over 1,000 peaceful protesters. Many of them have been tortured and are being sentenced in sham trials to decades in prison. But this disproportionate repression of the dictators is also a measure of their fear. The dictatorship had never before been so vulnerable and so exposed. However, the Cuban people still need the support of the international community. We need you, because you too play a role in our liberty, which is also your liberty. Your support in this crucial moment wouldn't just help the Cuban people, it would make you stronger and safer. In spite of their gains, there is a low-hanging fruit for democracy. The fall of the Cuban regime would be a huge blow to communism and help put us on track towards peace and security throughout the region. I'm here on behalf of our movement, Cuba Decide, in English, Cuba Decides. Our goal is singular: provide a path for Cubans to decide our own future and transition fully into democracy. We made a local and global campaign to create a kind of external pressure and internal critical mass that ensures the regime has no other option but to give in to the will of the people. The Cuba Decide movement continues the work of my father, Oswaldo Payá, who was the leader of the Cuban democratic movement. In 2012, he said, "Liberation is a task for the Cuban people." Now is a greater hope because we are definitely on the verge, on the threshold of truth and liberation. That is our hope. 4 months after that, the Cuban regime murdered him. The regime was afraid of him then, and today that same government is more afraid than ever of its own people. They know their end is near. The Cuban regime is the Berlin Wall of our time. Today, the Cuban people are standing on the threshold of freedom. This is a reality thanks to the work of our campaign alongside freedom fighters that stand in solidarity with each other, including some who are in this room tonight, and many others, like my father, who sends wave of change across the hemisphere. The time to act is now, and the place to do it is Cuba. So I'm profoundly grateful for the Common Sense Society commitment to liberty. I accept this Courage Award as a recognition to the fight of the Cuban people and with invigorated commitment to the fight for freedom. I dedicate this award to all the Cuban political prisoners, and especially to my father, Oswaldo Payá, and to my friend, Harold Cepero, who gave their lives so that Cubans could one day be free. May their courage and their actions be an inspiration for all of us. Thank you so much.